Okay, Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi say it is wonderful to see everybody. We left off in the middle of paragraph number 5, piece number 5 in Oros HaTechiyah. And before we can go on, those that have the sheets from last week, good. Those that don't, we're only going to be seeing a little bit inside because there's an important hakdama that needs to be stated before we can continue understanding what Rav Kook is going to be sharing with us. And that requires a little bit of an understanding of a word that has shown up a lot in recent years and politics and literature, and that is the word indigenous. You hear a lot that the Jewish people are not indigenous to the land. What does this mean, indigenous? So aside from the political ramifications of it, of which we are not concerned today, the idea of indigenousness as being a reason for people to be in control of a particular area, we should just take note of the fact that none of us are indigenous to the United States of America. In fact, pretty much nobody in the United States of America is indigenous, meaning the word indigenous means that at some arbitrary point in time, politically, when we say indigenous, it means that at some arbitrary point in time, these were the people that lived there, and therefore they have the right to be there. Yeah.
Indigenous means anybody who's not from Europe.
Yeah, that's
because even the
correct.
tribes over here, they pushed each other out.
100%. Meaning, yeah.
Look at Native Americans.
Indians,
Any influence.
100%. I mean, but even those Native Americans, are they all indigenous? To which areas? To where? To what? Meaning, the idea of indigenous is we drew a arbitrary line in the sand of history and said, this is where history begins from. So depending on who is doing the drawing the line in the sand will determine on who's called indigenous or not, right? How many generations do you have to go back to being indigenous? So it's a weird concept politically. But it's borrowed from a very important concept in terms of growing of crops and plants and trees, where indigenous means the soil in which this thing grows best naturally, right? That's what indigenous means in terms of raising of crops and raising of animals. There are certain trees, certain plants, certain crops that can only grow to their fullest potential in certain areas, in certain spaces, at certain places, at certain points in time. For example, there's a crisis that every now and then you see popping up on the news. Anybody here a coffee drinker? So apparently there's a crisis in the world of coffee. I don't know if this is true, this is not true, but there's a crisis, and there's an area of the globe called the coffee belt, which is, I think, within 15 degrees of the equator. That's the only area that coffee beans can grow properly, right? There's certain areas in France that certain grapes are indigenous, right? Means that they grow best in those areas. I think Dr. Grach, or Soloveitchik's son, made the point a little while back that visiting the hometown of Rashi dispelled the myth that Rashi was a vintner, that he made wine because grapes are not indigenous to that area of France. I don't know, maybe not. But the point that I'm trying to share with you is that indigenousness, I don't know what it means in terms of a political notion. That is up to everybody to make whatever political blah, 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 whatever they like. But in terms of growth of a plant or tree or an animal species, indigenous means the place that they are most capable of growing most naturally, that they reach their fullest potential. For example, where they thrive, meaning where they thrive to the maximum. Iguanas, for example, are not indigenous to Florida. HaRaya, what's the raya, is that while it is true that iguanas are ma'od matzliach in South Florida, whenever visitors come, they're like, what are the dinosaurs doing in Boca? Iguanas are not indigenous. HaRaya, the proof of this is, every couple of years, where for a day or two, in the middle of January, it drops below like 40 degrees, the iguanas freeze and drop from the trees, right? Don't put them in your trunk, they're not dead. Kachavit was a mice that happened to a friend of mine. Woo, look at that. Tried to clear up some iguanas. Once they warmed up in the trunk of his car, it was very Lebedik. Don't do that. But iguanas are not indigenous to South Florida. They are very matzliach, but they're not indigenous. Meaning, if there's a cold front that comes for a couple of days, which happens from time to time, all those iguanas are going to drop out of their trees and they're going to get run over by cars or whatever else is going to happen. They're not indigenous. They could be matzliach, but they're not indigenous. Rav Kook makes an argument in a number of places that the Jewish people are indigenous to Eretz Yisrael, not politically, but we are indigenous to Eretz Yisrael because that is the soil in which we grow best. That's where we grow. We, the Jewish people, we can live in other places, be me'od matzliach, very, very successful in lots of other places, but as a nation, we are indigenous to Eretz Yisrael. And not only that, Eretz Yisrael is indigenous to us, in the sense that, this is famous mimer of Shmuel and Maseches Brachos, that when the land of Israel gives forth its fruits, ein ketz the gedol mizu or nigle mizu, there's no more revealed sign of redemption than the land of Israel giving its fruit. It's not a secret that for many, 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 many generations, lots of people have lived in Israel. None of them have been matzliach there. Meaning, aside from the Jewish people, there has never ever been another government that has been autonomous, sovereign, uniquely identifiable in the land of Israel. And I'm not talking Palestinians, not Palestinians, lo ichpat. I'm talking, since the Churban Bayis Sheni, there has never been another group of people that have said, Eretz Yisrael is our homeland and we are its people. It has been a vassal of Rome and part of the Ottoman Empire, and it has been controlled by the church, and it's been controlled by the imams, and it's been controlled by the British, but all of those people had their capital elsewhere, right? Didn't have it in Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael was a piece of a larger empire. It was not the piece of the empire from which the empire expanded from. That's not to say that the Ummas HaOlam did not acquiesce and acknowledge the centrality of Eretz Yisrael religiously. And that's important to point out, that the three great religions of the West, if you want, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all agree that there is a holy city, that there is the concept of a city of God. All agree that there is a mountaintop, which is the mountain of God. And lo and behold, everybody agrees to the exact coordinations, like the coordinates of that spot. So everybody wants to fight over it, right? Meaning everybody wants ownership over it, but not for that to be the place that is the center of their world. For Christianity, that's still the Vatican, for Catholics at least. And for Muslims, it's Mecca and Medina. For us, there's only ever been one capital city. There's only ever been one central location that has been the center of the way that we operate. Now, the centrality of that is important to understand. It is a theme that runs its way through all of Chumash. What do I mean by that? So there's a well-quoted idea from the Ramban. You see this in a number of places in the Ramban, and this is explicitly at the beginning of Sefer Vayikra, where the Ramban writes that which existed at the top of Har Sinai was then transplanted into the Mishkan. That the cover that was sheichen at the top of Har Sinai is now going to be resting and residing within the Mishkan. And that Mishkan is traveling. It's going to spend time traveling for the next 40 years in the Midbar, and then it's going to be traveling at different stops, at different locations in Nov and in Givon and in Shiloh, that the Mishkan is going to hop around in Eretz Yisrael to a number of different locations, until eventually it's going to be in Beis Elamim, where it's going to be the centerpiece of the Jewish people in Yerushalayim. But what's important to understand, and you see this at the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar, is the Torah describes that there are concentric circles that surround this location. Those circles are Machane Shechina, Machane Levi, and Machane Yisrael. And there are halachas of who is allowed to go into each area at different points in time, and the level of kedusha that exists, and the restrictions of tumah and tahara in all of these areas. It is borrowed from, or perhaps continued from, surrounding of the Mishkan in the desert, which is surrounded Har Sinai, where there were machanos that surrounded the Makom HaMikdash. And the truth is that the order of the surrounding of the Mikdash in the Midbar was not arbitrary. Who defined that order? Much earlier. It's a Rashi at the end of Sefer Bereshis that was determined by Yaakov Avinu. The order that the sons of Yaakov surrounded the kever, the Oron of Yaakov, on their way to Eretz Yisrael when they were going to bury Yaakov Avinu in Maras HaMachpelah, which Avraham Avinu bought for us last Shabbos, right? Yaakov Avinu is surrounded by his 12 sons. And they arrive in Eretz Yisrael, the Medrash, and this is a Medrash in a number of places, then it's a Gemara in Masechah Saita, that when they arrive in Eretz Yisrael and they want to bury Yaakov in Maras HaMachpelah, all of the Umos, meaning all of the Bnei Avraham and all of their extensions, the Gemara says in Saita that all of the Bnei Yishmael and all of the Bnei Keturah, which we met at the end of last week's parasha, they all surround Yaakov's coffin. They're all surrounding it until Yosef HaTzadik, they all want to fight about it, until Yosef HaTzadik, who's the Shalit B'chol Eretz Mitzrayim, he's the guy that's in charge. So he puts his crown on top of the Aron of Yaakov, and then they all put the crowns on the top of the Aron of Yaakov Avinu, and that's when the Kavur of Yaakov Avinu takes place. It's important to point out, and this is where Esav comes and he fights with us, and that's why Esav's head gets tossed into Maras HaMachpelah, v'chule, Midrashim, which have many, many, many ramifications. Rav Kook is coming from many of those places, as we will see in a little bit. The point is that there is a surrounding of an idea, of an ideal, that makes its way from the idea of Yaakov Avinu to Har Sinai, to Mishkan, to Yerushalayim, where there is a central location and a surrounding of it. What is the central idea of Yaakov Avinu? So this the Rambam writes in Hilchos Kriya Shema. It is somewhat unique that the Rambam quotes a medrash in the Yad. Says the Rambam, what was Yaakov Avinu? So the Rambam explains that we have a practice today, this is a Gemara in Maseches Pesachim, that when we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and then we whisper, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Le'olam Va'ad. Where did that come from? What is this all about? Says the Gemara in Maseches Pesachim, and Agarata, which the Rambam quotes the La'alacha, that when Yaakov Avinu was about to die, he says to his sons, are you all monotheists? And they say, Shema Yisrael, listen, Yaakov, Yisrael, our father, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem is one, our God, Hashem Echad, Hashem is one. Yaakov Avinu was the one that coined that phrase. Meaning, the brothers coined that phrase. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And Yaakov's response to that was, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Le'olam Va'ad. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Le'olam Va'ad. That was his response. Now, then the Gemara details, so if Yaakov Avinu said it, how come we don't say it out loud? How come we don't say that out loud? So, because Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say it. It's not included as a pasuk in the Torah. It's part of Torah Sheba'al Peh. It's not in the Torah Shebechsav. It's not in the Torah Shebechsav, so we don't say it out loud. But how could we not say it? Because Yaakov Avinu, this is the appropriate response to Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Shema Yisrael is Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Le'olam. Right? That is the appropriate response to Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, is to acknowledge that this should be a kingdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that continues. Yeah.
Why do we say it out loud on Yom Kippur?
It's a great question. We say because we want to be like the Malachim. As an aside, it's important to take this into account. And this, I will give this to you guys as something to think about. There are many things that we say, that we have in halacha, that are about Malachim. Specifically, Chazal tell us that Malachim don't understand what language? Aramaic. That's very peculiar. It's very peculiar, right? They understand all of the nations. They understand that they speak in the Korean and in Japanese and in the Swahili and in Ndebele. They speak every language in the world. They don't speak Aramaic. Was meint das? They don't speak Aramaic. It's a very, very strange thing. So I did a little bit of research into this. It was about a year ago, a little less. That a couple of the guys in my shul were asking. They were asking what exactly like the thoughts that you're supposed to have during Kaddish. So Kaddish is all in Aramaic. Kaddish is all in Aramaic. And Aramaic is something that Malachim don't understand. What do you mean they don't understand? They don't understand Kaddish? What's going on here? So there is a sefer. There's a sefer of Tamei Mitzvahs and Tamei Minhagim that is called Keser Shem Tov. Keser Shem Tov, not of the Baal Shem. Not of the Baal Shem HaKadosh. There is another sefer called Keser Shem Tov, which was written by Rabbi Shem Tov Gogin. He was the chief rabbi of the Western Sephardic community in London, in England, about 120 years ago or so. Gon Olam. He was mamish Gon Olam. It's myself and Rabbi Kasola like often share ideas from whenever we can. It's recently been reprinted. Rabbi Yaakov Hillel's yeshiva, publishing house Avos Shalom, recently reprinted, and then it went out of print. I mean, it's a Kedai Sefer to know about. It's a Kedai Sefer to read. He has a long discussion about Kaddish, where he gives proof for this. But when he talks about Malachim not understanding Aramaic, he points out that Malachim doesn't mean angels. Malachim means, Lashon Saginaret is a euphemism for Malachim without an Aleph, meaning the kings, the Malchus. When the Jewish people returned back to Eretz Yisrael in the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, we were shortly, 200 years later, we were invaded by the Greeks. They spoke Greek. And then later by the Romans. And they spoke whatever, Latin, Germanic, something they spoke. But the colloquial language amongst Jews was Aramaic. And it was not a language that was spoken amongst the Roman conquerors and occupiers. And this is during the terribly traumatic and harrowing days of the Asara Harugi Malchus, which was about 2 generations worth, meaning the 10 martyrs that we talk about, on Tisha B'Av and on Yom Kippur. It wasn't all in one shot. It was over about 2 generations, more or less. There were terrible decrees against the Jewish people, and the thing that the Romans were most interested in was ensuring that Jews did not get together and organize against the Roman government. They were very nervous about that, which is why certain phrases that Jews say, they had no problem with religion. They had a big problem with Jewish sovereignty. No problem being religious. Go ahead and be religious. We don't care. We're happy to support whatever religion you want in the world. Don't be in control of this place. Do not have a government. Do not have sovereignty. Do not have a nation. Do not have a king. Certainly don't have an army. There are certain phrases that show up in davening that are by their very nature anti-government. For example, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchusa Le'olam Va'ed. Blessed be the name of his kingdom forever and ever. That is anti-government propaganda. This is a Tosfos Maseches Brachos. What is the translation of Baruch Shem Kavod Malchusa Le'olam Va'ed into Aramaic? Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevarach Le'olam Le'olam Maya. The primary response, the major response of Kaddish, is the Aramaic of Baruch Shem Kavod Malchusa Le'olam Va'ed, and that was something that we were terrified to say in public, because that was a capital offense. You get tried for treason by effectively having a group of Jews together saying, we don't want you to be the king, we want him to be the king. We want to reestablish Malchus Shamayim. So Aramaic, anytime that you have Aramaic that's slipped into the Siddur, from the days of Baisheni, I'm not talking about the Zohar, that pieces that are added in later, but the parts of the Siddur that were added in later on were colloquial Jewish vernacular that was not official liturgy, but got people to understand that what we are aiming for is Malchus Shamayim, and we did so under the radar so that the Romans didn't come and prosecute us for doing so. On Yom Kippur, however, the argument would be that at least once a year, own it. Right? Meaning at least once a year you say this out loud. At least once a year you're going to scream it from the rooftops because it's Yom Kippur. How could you not? How could you not acknowledge, exclaim, proclaim the thing that you so deeply believe in? But that's just an aside for the idea of Aramaic and Malachim. It explains a lot of very complex sugyas. But the Maramakim is in Keser Shem Tov, I think it's in Chelik Aleph, when he talks about Kaddish after, goes according to the order of the Shulchan Aruch, more or less, the order of the day, where he talks about Kaddish right after Korbanos in the morning. That's a little bit of a tangent, but not too much of a tangent, because the point of what we're saying is that Klal Yisrael, certainly since Bayesheni, but even before that, has not really had Malchus. We haven't been in sovereign control of Eretz Yisrael, and we are indigenous to Eretz Yisrael. That is where we grow best, and that is how Eretz Yisrael grows best. There's a famous mimer of the Vilna Gaon, which is written in his parish on the section of the Zohar Kodesh called Safra D'Tznius. It's at the end of the Chelek, where the Gra makes the following assertion, based on the Zohar Kodesh, and we'll say this outside, that the Jewish people without the land of Israel is like a body without a soul. What's the body? The body is Eretz Yisrael. What's the soul? The soul is Klal Yisrael. What happens when body and soul are separated? That's what we call death. That's called death. What do we mean that's called death? What happens to the body? The body rots, decomposes, and decays. What happens to the soul? Flies all the way up to Shema, right? The soul becomes much more abstract, much more ethereal, much more non-physical. It's only in this world that body and soul are fused together, like the mashal of the ner connected to the candle, right? The flame in the ner, where the soul is trying to go up and the wax is dripping down. That's body and soul fused together. And there's tension between body and soul always. But it's only when body and soul are united that you have this capacity, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, to illuminate and to shine and to create warmth and light and illumination. But the moment that these two things are separated, so soul disappears and the body rots, decomposes. Says the Gra that that's exactly what happened to the Jewish people in Galus. The body, that's called Eretz Yisrael, rots, decomposes, decays, falls to pieces. What happens to the soul? What happens to the Jewish people? So we fly up, we become much more abstract. We become disconnected from the ideas of this world. We become less oriented in physical reality and less able to affect any changes in the physical world. We become, like we spoke about last week or the week before, people of the book. We become academics. We become scholars, and we become philosophers and theologians. We become people that are deeply engrossed in words, but far less engaged in action, and we are incapable of affecting any material change in the world. The lot of the Jewish people throughout most of Galus is to be respected as a theological, philosophical entity, and denigrated, stepped on, traipsed all over as a physical nation. We are good for our brains. Chutz mizeh, nothing. Tchias HaMesim on a national level then means the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, where the soul becomes far more deeply engaged with the affairs of the body, and the body begins to flourish. That is called national Tchias HaMesim. That is the premise of Rav Kook's writing of Yisrael Tchiyasa and Oros HaTechiyah. What we are attempting on a national level is nothing short of Tchias HaMesim. We are attempting on a national level to reunite the body and soul of the Jewish people, to create a sovereign Jewish nation that is going to be the dominant culture of the world in the future. That's what we are ultimately attempting to do. That's the goal, that's the drive, that's the striving, that's the avoda. What's the roadmap to get there? So the answer is, well, we don't really have one. Certainly not since the days of Moshe Rabbeinu and Yeshua ben Nun. And so with that Hagdama, there is a one-liner that we are going to read in this piece of Oros HaTechiyah. Those that have it, you're more than welcome to take a look where we more or less stopped off from. Where Rav Kook writes as follows. Nishmasenu makefes olam umlo'oi. Our soul, the soul of the Jewish people, that's us. What? Correct. The soul of the Jewish people. Makefes olam umlo'oi incorporates the entirety of the world and everything inside of it. Umatzeges osoi al basis achdusoi ha'elyon, and represents HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as we'll explain in a moment, al basis achdusoi ha'elyon, on the platform of the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world. Umishum kach, and because of this, he bikirbat tama v'koleles, it is within us, tama, wholesome, from the word tamim, v'koleles, and all-inclusive. V'ein ba klal oisam ha-nigudim v'ha'arkavos hashonim, and within us are not all of those weird graftings and different elements and pieces harigilim b'nishmas am v'lashon that exist in all other nations and languages. Meaning the Jewish people as a whole, as a collective entity, is all-encompassing, is wholesome and complete, and contains within it everything that is necessary for us to reunite body and soul and to reanimate our life and the life of the Jewish people and the life of the entirety of the world. Because the Torah Kedosha has already given us all of the tools that we need inside of ourselves to be able to flourish. Now, the mashal is, and we'll discuss this, please God, next time in greater detail, but the mashal is, inside of the apple is the entirety of the apple tree. Right? You put the apple, cut it open, take the seed, put it in the ground. You cannot see the apple tree that's in the seed, but it's there. It's all there. Everything that you need to make an apple tree is inside of the apple that you just pulled from the tree. There's an infinite amount of apple trees inside of this apple. It's there. It needs to be tended appropriately and planted in the right soil, and it needs to have the right environment. But if you do that, it's going to work. As opposed to, says Rav Kook, every other nation which is a hybrid of lots of different things. If you open up a Oxford English dictionary, some of you guys might still have them, your grandchildren for sure don't, right? If you Google a word, right, open up Wikipedia, you'll see the etymology of words. Where's English from? Greek, Latin, emoji, weiß ich nicht, right? Meaning, where's English from? Where's Lashon Kodesh from? Lashon Kodesh is from us. It's from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's from the Torah Kedosha. That's where Lashon HaKodesh is derived from. And I'll end just with a vignette that will illustrate this. During the rally in Washington, meaning at the beginning of the war, that the whole Jewish world showed up to this rally in Washington, I got on the subway train thing to get back to the airport, and there was some fellow that was fighting with me about supporting Israel. And he was yelling at me about, like, indigenousness. And he said, who are you guys to show up? And so I said to him, you're a Christian. He said, yes. I said, what language did King David speak? He said, what do you mean? I said, you read the Bible? Yes. What language did King David speak? And which people speak that language? So then he started screaming at me about a whole bunch of other stuff. The Nakuda is, within us is all the pieces of what we need. That's the Nakuda that Rav Kook is saying here. As opposed to every other language and every other nation, which is a hybrid of all sorts of things, all the things that have attached themselves to the Jewish people are external to the seed from which everything else is going to grow. Because everything that we need is already there. And then the question is, okay, so what's the roadmap to be able to plant that and to grow that, and what do we need to be doing? Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, that will be continued, I believe, in 2 weeks' time. Next week, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, I'll be in Eretz Yisrael celebrating my niece's Bas Mitzvah. So I will see you guys, please God, in 2 weeks' time.